My name's Ehren Dorsey, and my story today is about how I was groomed through a flip phone by a predator almost 20 years ago, and how it kind of impacted my life as a woman for a long time. I grew up in a very conservative home. Both of my parents are from really small towns in Illinois, and I think they thought that a really good way of raising kids was to try and keep them away from as much of the world as possible. It's not that I was never out in the world. Obviously I would go and see my extended family, but my parents, when we were at home where we lived in the suburbs, I was very much taught that the world was dangerous, which it can be, obviously, but I didn't have access to TV very much. And then I also wasn't allowed to watch anything mainstream, listen to anything mainstream. So I had a very sheltered life. I remember this girl in my class was wearing shorts that had Looney Tunes characters on them. I didn't know who Bugs Bunny was, and she thought that was kind of strange, and that wasn't necessarily a traumatic moment, but I had moments like this all the time where people would make references to things that I didn't know, or people would have inside jokes to things that I didn't know. I wasn't really a part of the world or getting the same experience in the world that they were, and so this did create feelings of being different from people, on top of the fact that my parents were really unhappy with each other, mainly my mom. There was a lot of tension in the house. I don't really have any memories of my parents being happy and affectionate towards each other. My mom struggled a lot with emotionally regulating herself, and so there would be a lot of walking on eggshells with her, feeling like I didn't know how to make her happy and not wanting to make her upset. There was a time where there was a fly in the garage, and she was upset and she just wanted me to go outside and play, and I thought the fly was a bee, so I was really scared and I didn't want to go out in the garage because of the flying noise. And she got so upset that she ended up shaking me and sort of pinning me to the ground, and sitting on top of me and shaking me and saying, "It's just a fly." And then she sort of would come to afterwards. And I remember explicitly with that memory, she asked me to not tell anyone after it happened. So, my parents were always talking about potentially getting divorced. There was all this kind of animosity and intense emotion going on. They were very unhappy, and they ultimately ended up divorcing. So after my parents' divorce, what pretty much happened was my mom became a full-time mom, and I pretty much became a child parent, is how I would call it. I ended up being the child that my mom had a problem with the most. My mom does struggle with mental health issues, and one aspect to her mental health issues is that she sort of holds on to a fantasy version of reality, and anyone who questions or might make her question that fantasy version of reality is a threat to her that needs to be put down and sort of beat into submission in a way. And so I was the one who challenged her perspective on things the most. And so we fought all the time. We fought because I challenged her. We fought because I wasn't being a good enough child parent. It sort of became a lot of fighting between me and my mom, on top of the fact that she wasn't there and I was needing to cook and take care of kids and do all these things that I just didn't really want to do. I was very close with my older sister. She was about 14 months older than me, so we were almost psychological twins in a way, but she was very good at being nurturing. She was the oldest, so she fell into that role quite naturally. And I would sort of get told all the time, "Why can't you be like her?" I got told that all the time. I got told what a disappointment I was all the time. There was a lot of constant messaging about what was wrong with me all the time, and that created a lot of anger in me, a lot of depression. I remember I would get stomach aches from how angry I was all the time, and I couldn't express those feelings to my mom because it would cause her to get upset, and we would have to talk about it for hours and hours and hours until she was pacified. So from being still very sheltered and very controlled, I had parents, but neither of them were almost present at all. My dad, when we did see him on the weekends, would just stay up in his bedroom, and we could almost do whatever we wanted at my dad's house, almost too much of whatever we wanted. We had a computer there, and I would get online and play different games. This is in the early days of the internet. But then at my mom's house, we were hyper controlled. And so I felt torn between two worlds, especially because I did want a father who cared about me and paid attention to me, but I didn't feel like he was even there. The other thing that happened was my parents wanted our comfort about the divorce. They didn't ask us our feelings at all. And so this idea of someone else's feelings coming before mine and mine not mattering were kind of taught to me by my parents as well. And that's a very common theme in abusive relationships. So where I was at when I was 13 years old is I have all this confusion, all this anger, all this loneliness, and I don't want a boyfriend. I need a boyfriend. I need someone to love me. And that is a very vulnerable place to be in. And so I had gotten a flip phone from my dad. And again, no real experience in the world, but feeling very lonely. So I got on this flip phone and I started seeing if there was anything that I could do with it other than literally just text people. I was like, there's got to be something else I can get out of this to get me almost high in a way. You know, that's really what I was looking for, something to make me feel better from all the negative stuff that I had going on inside. And I managed to find free trials for chat rooms on this flip phone. And so I got on one, and I had already been doing role-playing boards, RPG forums. It was Harry Potter themed. And so when people use the term role-playing on there, they just meant creative writing. You would make a Harry Potter character and do creative writing. So I got on this chat room and I asked if anyone wanted to role-play with me, because I didn't know that that had sexual connotations. I just liked creative writing. And this man, Billy, messaged me back and he said, yeah, I'll role play with you. So we exchanged phone numbers. And obviously, it's not that I didn't think there was the potential for danger in this, but my child mind, my logic at the time was that he doesn't know where I live, so he can't hurt my body. What I didn't understand is that he could hurt my mind, and he hurt my mind for about 3 years. And so what ended up happening is that very quickly into my relationship with Billy, he started sending me porn. What would happen is that we would pretty much just text occasionally while I was at my mom's house. And then when I was over at my dad's house on the weekend and I had access to a computer, I would go down to the computer at night when everyone was asleep and he would send me porn. He would tell me what websites to go to look at porn. And then the other thing that we would do later on is we would end up Skyping and he would have me watch him masturbate. But when he first sent me porn, the first porn video that he sent me and many of the other porn videos that he sent me was incredibly violent. So, you know, when we're talking about molestation and what that really is like for a child in real life, it's a child skipping a lot of steps and seeing or experiencing something that leaves them incredibly and inherently disturbed inside, making them feel like something inappropriate happened that they weren't prepared for. And that's what it felt like for me when I saw this video. I didn't have the words for that. I just knew that it scared me and I didn't like the way everything looked. And I couldn't go to my parents to talk about that. You know, I have this experience and my first thought isn't, wow, I wonder what's wrong with these adults. My first thought is, they're adults. They know what they're doing. I should probably want to be doing that. You know, so what's wrong with me? Is there something wrong with me? And instead of going to my parents, I went to him to process those feelings of insecurity, because I already felt like something was wrong with me all the time anyway. And just like a typical predator and abuser, he saw that as an opportunity to start wearing down my self-esteem, because those are the types of loopholes that they look for to start controlling us. So I went to him to process these feelings of insecurity. And one of the first things that he told me was that this probably meant that I was a lesbian, because normal straight girls don't react to porn that way. They like what they see, they enjoy all of it. So if I didn't like this, you know, we should really examine that together. And then later on, as I continued to be upset about things, he would make fun of me for having small boobs. He would make fun of me for not knowing things. Like, I didn't know how to masturbate before I met this man. And he would make fun of me for that. He'd be like, how do you not know how to do that? So I was like, okay, this should be like a really important thing for me. Like, screw reading books and screw learning about love. Masturbation is like the top thing that should be a top priority for me. So because I didn't know how to masturbate, he was the one who taught me how to masturbate. And he would basically give me step-by-step instructions through text, and I would describe to him what I was doing. And there would be times where I didn't come. When I first opened up to him about that, again, he would make me feel like there was something wrong with me. And so what I started doing after a while is I started lying and saying, yeah, I came because I just wanted it to stop and I didn't want to be put down again, you know? And I stopped opening up to him as much. Like, one time, you know, I vomited after I watched him masturbate. It was one of the first few times, but I didn't tell him that because I knew what he was going to say to me. And so I also started learning this habit of secrecy, of not opening up fully about my feelings, that it wasn't safe to necessarily do that because someone would just tell me that there was something wrong with me. But that wasn't the only aspect to our relationship, or I wouldn't have stayed. Here was a person who was finally giving me attention. It wasn't attention 24/7, because one of the main memories that I have is that the type of cell phone that I had, when I had a text message, it would blink this little red light at the top. And because I was not the only girl he was talking to, why would I be the only? And I didn't know that at the time. I found that out later. But he wouldn't consistently respond to me. And I stopped living. After a while, I stopped writing. I stopped listening to music. I stopped doing things that I liked because I was just watching my cell phone for a text message. And this is where my brain was getting rewired in a way that's similar to an addict, looking for the, waiting on the, he was my. And so I really felt like I did love him. Looking back on it now, because this was a very similar way that I thought I loved a lot of other men in my life later on who were abusive to me. And I don't know if it was love, because it was so chaotic and unstable and so much like a, but love and these feelings became synonymous for me for a really long time after this even. So because Billy and I were on again, off again, there was a period of time where I managed to not talk to Billy for, I want to say it was 4 to 5 months. And this was when I first moved in with my dad when I was 16. I finally got out of my mom's house. I moved in with my dad and I finally started having a life, And while I was having a life, I'm at my dad's house. I have consistent access to a computer now, and I cut him off, but I'm still looking for a way to meet a guy who's going to be my drug of sorts, because once I stop talking to a guy, I start feeling really depressed. I don't have hobbies. I abandoned all my hobbies and all my interests to be hyper fixated on this guy for years. So what would happen is when I would cut Billy off, yes, I was lonely, but I was also what do I do with myself? Because I hadn't been investing in other things. So I went back online and I ended up talking to a guy who was a really nice guy. Honestly, he was closer to my age. We never ended up meeting, but I did that for a few months before he ultimately told me, I'm still in love with my ex-girlfriend and this can't really go anywhere. And I was so devastated by that, because here was a guy who had been treating me pretty decent and it didn't work out. And I felt like that reflected on me somehow, So instead of just working through those feelings, I decided, what I'm going to do? I'm going to reach back out to my old drug and I'm going to see what he's up to. Now I have a car and a driver's license and he's more than ready to meet me. And so my parents were divorced. So I told my dad I was going over to my mom's house and my mom was not expecting me. And I literally just printed out MapQuest printouts, because there were no Google Maps, and I just started driving. I had no idea what to expect. I remember I didn't understand that exit signs went in numerical order. And so I was constantly worried that I'd missed the exit. I had so many panic attacks. I'd never driven out of state. You know what I mean? And suddenly I'm out of state. I'm like, okay. I smelled disgusting by the time I got down there from all the panic attacks. I would try and take a nap and pull over and sleep, but the anxiety would wake me up. So I didn't even really get that much sleep. I was just raw and exhausted. By the time I got down there, I hadn't even eaten that much because I was feeling so nauseous and nervous. I met him at a gas station and we left it wasn't even my truck, it's my dad's truck. We left my dad's truck at a gas station and I get in his car, and I had told him that I was nervous and I wanted to go at my own pace. Well, the minute I get in the car, he starts putting his hands down my pants. And I said, okay, I'm not ready to do that yet. And he completely ignored me, like did not care. And that was where I had the first moment where I was like, okay, I'm in a different state. I told no one I was coming down here. Now I'm in his car, so I can't, like, I'm gonna have to jump out and run back. So my brain started kind of shutting down a little bit and I started freezing. You know, everybody has different reactions in moments where they feel threatened and scared. Some people fight, flight, fawn, freeze. I froze, you know? And so we ended up driving back to his house. Time ceased being real at this point. I think it was like maybe 20, 30 minutes. And he's asking me to masturbate in the car. I shouldn't have been surprised. I really should not have been, but somehow I was, you know? So we get back to his house, we go inside, and now I'm like, okay, now no one can see me in here in this house. And he's so tall. He was like 6'5" or 6'6". I mean, that in and of itself, I was like, he was real. He was a real person. It wasn't a fantasy anymore. It wasn't somebody in the phone. It's like meeting somebody on a first date and you get nervous anyway, but this person I was nervous and he wasn't respecting any of my boundaries. So we get into the house and he can tell that I'm looking very like shaky and scared, and that made him mad. He didn't like that. And so I saw him get mad. And that also was really intimidating to me. And he said, if you look at me like that again, I'm gonna hurt you. So what I did is I just pacified him. Whatever he wanted to do, we did. It was really painful. When we did, things did not fit. He had to stretch me out. I would cry, but he didn't care that I was crying, you know? He knew that I was a virgin and he was very excited about taking my virginity. He laid a towel down on the bed and I didn't understand why he did that. And then I found out later that he was married and he had a wife and he didn't want her to see the blood on the bed. And so there were all these things that I wasn't even really processing because I was just trying to get through. The first time that we did, I didn't, and that made him mad. So we had to do it again, you know. I mean, we did it again anyway, but he made sure that the next time and it tasted disgusting. For years afterwards, several years afterwards, the smell of sweaty skin would make me throw up. And I worked very hard on making my skin sweaty myself and smelling it so that I could get used to that smell again, because I didn't want it to affect me for the rest of my life. If I went to sleep, I would try and sleep, but if he was in the mood for sex again, he would wake me up. And he didn't care if I was tired or not. He didn't really feed me a lot that weekend. I was very much just in survival mode, you know, just trying to make him happy so he would let me go back to my car. I just wanted to go back to my car. But at the same time, I feel like I'm an adult, and I also don't think it's rape, to be honest, because I'm not kicking and screaming, and everything that he's doing I've seen in these porn videos too. The age difference, the woman's needs not mattering, you know. So later on, when I first went to a social worker about this, she said it didn't sound like rape because I drove down there and I didn't kick and scream. So I can see how everyone would have their own opinion, but my counter argument is that I was desensitized to this stuff and broken down for 3 years as a child, you know. How much consent did I have in that moment, especially when a lot of the decision of driving down there was based on a lie. The lie that he loved me and he would care about me and he would take my needs into account. If someone had said, hey, you're gonna go down there and he's gonna do and all this other stuff to you all weekend, I wouldn't have driven down there. You know, I wouldn't, especially if they were like, he's not going to feed you a lot, he's not going to care if you cry, and he's not going to stop when you ask him to stop. And so for all those reasons, I didn't think I had been raped. People had to kind of convince me that I had been raped, but I was raped. When it comes to how he took my innocence in so many different ways for 3 years, not just because everybody, I understand how that people are like, oh, that's the moment that really messed you up for a long time. It affected me and it still affects my sex life, but what affects me more is the 3 years of my innocence being taken. My innocence had been taken for a very long time before just that moment. And I actually remember there was one day I was texting him, I don't remember what age I was, maybe it was 14 or 15, but he literally said to me, there is innocence inside of you that I want to take. He literally said that to me. And I remember being like, that's really weird. Like I didn't appreciate my innocence. I didn't value my innocence because I'm a kid. You know what I mean? It feels disposable. It feels like you're always going to have a lot of it. I think the part that's crazy is, and yet not crazy, because I think it showed maybe how much the fawning worked as a survival mechanism, but he just drove me back to my truck. I don't know if he just really had so much confidence in my love for him. If I hid my emotions well enough, I don't know what it was, but he seemed very unconcerned with letting me go back home, genuinely. So, I just got in my car and drove back home. My brain has a very good job of compartmentalizing stuff and never thinking about it again. That is something my brain still does even to this day. I have to actively work to recall memories, to make myself remember relationships after I get out of them. It just wants to put everything in boxes now. And so I drove back home. I remember I got home, my dad wasn't home at the time, and I walked up the stairs. My sister was in one of the other bedrooms and she said something to me, just small talk. And I was like, I have to take a bath, didn't want to talk to her. And what it felt like in that moment was like I had just gotten out of a war and she was there in normal reality. And I was suddenly carrying this journey inside of me that, it was like this whole world was suddenly inside of me and her world had stayed the same. And I just felt that difference in that moment. So I totally took a really long bath. I remember that. And then I didn't talk about it for a few months. There's nothing to talk about. I had really gross stuff happen. I didn't like it. I was embarrassed that I did everything that I did. And I just was upset that I wasn't a virgin anymore. And then after a while, people were telling me that I was acting different, that I was really quiet, that I seemed angrier. My coworkers were telling me that because I worked at Starbucks at the time. And I was with my mom one day, and she and I had been doing counseling together. And this counselor was really nice, just a really kind, gentle guy. And I think also because he was a man and I still wasn't close to my dad, I was like, Mom, can I talk to this guy alone? And for whatever reason, I just decided to talk to this guy about what happened. And I was just like, I don't know how to process this. I'm feeling a lot of shame about what happened. And he was like, well, I think you were raped. And I was like, I don't know if I agree with that. And he was the one who called the social worker with me, who said, it sounds like you drove down there. So yeah, it wasn't rape. And he hung up the phone. He was like, we have to tell your mom. And I was like, I don't want to tell my mom. So we ended up telling my mom. She also was like, yes, you were raped. And the whole time I'm just like, I kind of agree with the social worker. I had just wanted to talk to this dude about it, and it started turning into this whole other thing that was making me very nervous. And then my mom was like, you're gonna have to tell your dad. And I was like, I definitely don't want to tell him because he's who I live with, and I lied to him and I took his car. And she was like, well, if you don't tell him, I will literally tell him. So when I told my dad, he did get mad at me. He did not have the best reaction. All you can do is move forward. All you can do is move forward. But yeah, he was definitely, there was no sympathy of oh my gosh, are you okay? It was just like, wow, you took my truck to another state. You lied to me about talking to this guy for years. This happened when I was 16. I'm 31 now. And it was really only within the I tried working on myself. It's not that I didn't try working on myself, but I'm so good at compartmentalizing so many different things. And I think because I didn't want to feel weak as a person, I remember feeling proud of the fact that I never cried about this. That I really thought, I was like, I'm good. This doesn't affect me. This is awesome. Little did I realize I went on to have sex in the same exact ways with people after that. And I went on to have romantic relationships with the same dynamics. But I pretty much dated 40-year-old men, for a majority of my life. I tried dating women for a while because I was just like, I don't know if that's what I am attracted to. Am I not? I didn't know what I was really doing with a lot of it. And in all of these relationships, I was very shut down in sex. And I wouldn't talk to them about it because what did I learn with Billy? I learned that you don't talk about it. You get shamed, you get put down, you don't open up about that stuff. And I think I just got used to not feeling anything. That became very normal for me. I don't think I've had a lot of experiences in my life where I've been really like romantically connected and emotionally present during sex. I don't know if that ever will be able to happen for me. I think it would have to be with a really safe person. And I haven't really been able to date safe people for a majority of my life, because what I didn't realize was that I was still dating in very self-exploitive and self-abusive ways. And so I'm really going back to square one with that. With my parents, I do have a relationship with them today. And the other thing that I've really had to work on in my life that I'm still working on is not fawning. Really allowing myself to feel angry and upset and standing up for myself. And that's been very hard for me. A lot of these things get hardwired into your brain from the trauma, and you have to do different techniques like EMDR and different hypnotherapy sometimes to get that out of the short term and into the long term so it can be fully processed. But I've had to really work on that, because I will shut down in conflict, and it's my animal brain doing that, so I've had to learn how to undo that mechanism. I've had to learn how to undo my addictions. I went on to be addicted to substances and alcohol. I mean, this affected so many different aspects to my life, but I'm really proud of the fact today that I'm 31 years old and I am figuring it out. And our recovery doesn't always look like what our family wants. I think our family, because they love us or whatever other reason there may be, they want our recovery to look a certain way. And I think people want to hear a success story that, you overcame this and you changed and you went back to being normal or something. But that's not really how it works. I was a really depressed person for a really long time. I don't know if I was letting myself grieve, but I was definitely feeling a lot for a really long time. It felt like I was on fire inside and I didn't know how to put the fire out. And one thing that's really helped me with that is choosing to have joy. It's a choice, and I have to choose to have joy sometimes, not to not process what's going on inside, but to not let the black hole just like suck me in. I actually started a YouTube channel, and I guess the reason I call it Ehren's Journal is because it's conversations that I have with myself and other girls that I meet in real life, but I decided to just start putting it online instead, and so that it could maybe help other girls who haven't realized some of this stuff, or other people. I know men are survivors too. So that's been very therapeutic for me as well, to feel like I'm helping other people. I'm someone who survived evil in so many different ways, but I say grooming survivor a lot, because then people go, oh, what is that? Like, what do you mean online grooming survivor? And then I get the chance to tell them about this thing that's happening online to a lot of kids nowadays, and is actually very common, and it just kind of starts the conversation. So I've fallen into labeling it that way as a conversation starter.